On October 24, 2001, as 50-year-old nurse Sandra Stotler baked cookies in her kitchen in Conroe, Texas, a deadly plan was unfolding outside her home. 19-year-old Michael James Perry crept to Stotler's back door, armed with a 12-gauge shotgun. When Stotler answered the knock, Perry shot her in the side, and as she struggled to rise, he fired again, killing her instantly. This brutal murder, committed for the sake of stealing Stotler's shiny red Chevrolet Camaro, was only the beginning of a shocking crime spree that would leave 3 people dead and ultimately send Perry to Texas's death row. This isn't just another true crime story. This is about how quickly a simple theft can spiral into unthinkable violence. Welcome to Deadline Files. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support means a great deal, and it keeps these important stories alive. October 24, 2001, Conroe, Texas. A gated lakeside community where neighbors know each other and families feel secure. Sandra Stotler, a 50-year-old nurse and devoted mother, sits in her comfortable suburban home waiting for her teenage son Adam to return from his evening out. In her driveway sat 2 vehicles that had caught someone's attention: her prized red Camaro sports car and the family's practical Isuzu rodeo SUV. Down the street, 2 young men she knew, friends of her son, were watching her house from their truck, planning something that would shatter multiple families forever. Michael James Perry, 19 years old, and Jason Aaron Burkett, also 19. To understand what happened that night, you need to understand who these 2 really were. Perry's story shows how someone can have every advantage and still choose destruction. Born in 1982, he was adopted by loving middle-class parents in Texas who tried to give him every opportunity to succeed. But from first grade, Perry was different, diagnosed with ADHD, then oppositional defiant disorder by 7th grade, conduct disorder by 8th grade. His parents watched helplessly as their son spiraled out of control. He became chronically truant, stole from family members, broke into neighbors' homes. They tried everything: counseling camps in Florida, Boys Town Reform School in Nebraska, even a secured facility in Mexico. Perry was expelled from Boys Town after threatening staff and dropped out of every program. By 19, he'd hit rock bottom. During estrangement from his family, he ended up homeless in San Diego, even briefly working as a male prostitute to survive, a chapter that filled him with self-loathing and rage. He drifted back to Texas, heavily using drugs like Xanax while committing petty thefts, angry at the world. Jason Burkett came from genuine poverty and dysfunction, childhood marked by abuse, neglect, and criminal behavior. Together, they made a toxic combination. Perry with his middle-class resentment and drug-fueled recklessness, Burkett with his street-smart ruthlessness and complete disregard for human life. Here's what makes this story terrifying. Sandra knew these boys. They were acquaintances of her 17-year-old son Adam, part of that network of teenagers who knew each other from school and parties. They'd been to the Stotler house before, knew the family routine, the house layout, and most importantly, exactly what treasures were sitting in that driveway. Sandra's red Camaro wasn't just any sports car. It was her pride and joy. She'd worked extra hospital shifts to afford it, representing years of sacrifice and hard work. To Perry and Burkett, it was just something they wanted and felt entitled to take. The original plan was simple: wait for everyone to sleep, quietly steal the Camaro, and disappear. No violence, no confrontation. But when Sandra told them Adam wouldn't be home for hours, something shifted in their drug-addled minds. Why wait? Why risk getting caught later? This is where a simple theft became something infinitely worse. Perry and Burkett left Sandra's house, but parked just down the street. Around 8:30 p.m., they returned. Sandra let them in. She knew them, trusted them as Adam's friends. Once inside, the plan unfolded with a chilling calculation. Burkett kept Sandra distracted in the living room while Perry slipped into the laundry room, carrying a 12-gauge shotgun. Perry knocked on the back door from inside the house. When Sandra came to investigate, she opened the door and saw Perry standing there with the shotgun. The look of recognition, the flash of terror in her eyes. Perry would later describe these details with casual indifference that shocked detectives. 2 shots. Sandra Stotler, a woman who had spent over 2 decades saving lives as a nurse, was dead within seconds. But they weren't done. They were just getting started. Most people would panic after committing murder. Perry and Burkett methodically wrapped Sandra's body in sheets from her own linen closet, loaded her into Burkett's pickup truck, and drove to Crater Lake. They dumped Sandra into the dark water without ceremony, then returned to search for the Camaro keys. But they couldn't find them. Despite tearing through Sandra's belongings, the keys were nowhere to be found. Perry was getting agitated. They'd killed Sandra for nothing if they couldn't get the car. Then Burkett realized Adam would be coming home soon with keys to both vehicles. That's when they decided to turn a single murder into triple homicide. They called Burkett's 17-year-old girlfriend Kristen Willis to meet them at the house. Now 3 teenagers sat in a dead woman's home, waiting for her son to come home so they could kill him too. While they waited, Adam Stotler was having what would be the last normal evening of his life. He was 17, a senior in high school, the kind of kid who said yes ma'am and no sir and helped elderly neighbors. He was particularly close to his mother Sandra, feeling protective of her as the man of the house. That evening, Adam was with his friend Jeremy Richardson, 18, who had graduated the previous spring and was working full-time while figuring out his future. Jeremy was polite, responsible, the kind of young man parents loved having around. They'd been friends since middle school, talking about dreams and plans for the future. These were 2 young men with their whole lives ahead of them, with no idea they were driving into a trap that would end their lives before they turned 20. Around midnight, Adam's Isuzu Rodeo pulled into the driveway. When Adam and Jeremy walked through the front door, expecting to find Sandra watching TV, they instead found Perry and Burkett in the living room. Perry and Burkett had their story ready. A friend had been hurt in a hunting accident in the woods and needed immediate help. They tried calling 911, but cell service was spotty. This manipulation was brilliant because it appealed to Adam's character. He was the kind of kid who would drop everything to help someone in trouble. His mother was a nurse. He'd grown up around medical emergencies. Jeremy was more cautious, asking questions, but Adam was already grabbing a flashlight and first aid kit. The plan was for Adam and Jeremy to follow Perry and Burkett's truck to where their friend was supposedly injured. Adam offered to call his mother, but Perry discouraged him. "Don't wake her up. We'll be back in an hour." The drive to the wooded area took 15 minutes. Adam was probably thinking about medical supplies they might need. Jeremy might have been getting suspicious about driving so far into isolated woods at midnight. Neither had any idea they were driving to their execution. The wooded area was perfect for murder. Isolated, dark, far from houses where gunshots might be heard. When both vehicles stopped, Adam and Jeremy immediately started looking for the injured friend, calling out with flashlights. Perry and Burkett let this go on for several minutes, probably enjoying watching their victims search desperately for someone who didn't exist. The first shot came without warning. Jeremy Richardson was shot in the back as he searched through underbrush. He died instantly, never understanding what was happening. Adam heard the gunshot and spun around, finally realizing the horrible truth. According to Perry's later confession, Adam begged for his life, offering money, car keys, promising he wouldn't tell anyone. He was 17 years old, terrified, and desperate to live. Perry shot him in the chest. As Adam fell dying, Perry stood over him and fired again. Adam Stotler died in those dark woods, probably thinking about his mother. The killers went through both bodies, taking wallets and anything valuable, then drove both vehicles back to finally claim their prize. Less than 24 hours after committing triple murder, Perry and Burkett were celebrating like they'd accomplished something magnificent. They went to a local bar in the stolen vehicles, parking both right out front. Inside, they bragged to anyone who listened that they had won the lottery. They bought drinks with money from their victims' wallets and offered strangers joyrides in the flashy Camaro. While 3 families were starting to worry about missing loved ones, these killers were partying and showing off the vehicles they'd murdered for. Witnesses later testified about how carefree Perry and Burkett seemed, laughing, joking, completely without remorse. October 26th, Perry was driving Sandra's Camaro when police tried to pull him over for a traffic violation. Instead of stopping, Perry led officers on a high-speed chase through residential neighborhoods at over 80 miles per hour, putting dozens of lives at risk. The chase ended when Perry crashed the Camaro into a tree. The car that 3 people had died for was now a twisted wreck. Perry tried to flee, but was caught. When arrested, he handed police Adam Stotler's driver's license and gave them Adam's name. Think about the evil calculation. Perry was using the identity of one of his murder victims to escape consequences. Since officers didn't know Adam was dead, they processed Perry under the victim's identity and released him on bond. A triple murderer walked free. October 27th, Sandra's body was discovered floating in Crater Lake. When police ran the Camaro's license plate, they discovered it belonged to the woman whose body they just found. Adam Stotler, the driver they'd arrested, was actually Sandra's missing son. The biggest break came from Kristen Willis, Burkett's terrified girlfriend who had witnessed parts of the crime spree. On October 29th, Perry confronted Willis with the shotgun used in the murders. "I have already killed somebody. It's not going to hurt me to kill anyone else." Despite this death threat, Willis courageously decided to cooperate with police, giving them information needed to track down both killers. October 30th, police spotted the stolen Isuzu at a truck stop with Perry and Burkett inside. When officers moved to arrest them, the killers tried to escape by striking a police officer with the vehicle. The chase ended in another crash. Burkett fled into the woods, but was caught. Perry was trapped with severe injuries. As Perry was loaded into an ambulance, thinking he might die, something extraordinary happened. He began confessing to everything. "I killed Sandra Stotler," he told paramedics and officers. "I shot her with the shotgun." He provided detailed directions to where Adam and Jeremy's bodies could be found, describing exactly how the murders were carried out. The level of detail was extraordinary. He knew things only the killer could know. Police immediately found the bodies exactly where Perry said they'd be. The murder weapon was discovered in the wrecked Isuzu, along with Perry's DNA on a cigarette, but found under Adam's body. The case was solved by Perry's own words. Once Perry realized he'd survived to stand trial, he immediately tried retracting his confession. First, he claimed he'd been babbling nonsense under drug influence. When that didn't work, he alleged police coercion. But his confession had been recorded and showed no signs of coercion. He'd spoken freely, providing information only the perpetrator could possess. Perry's trial began in February 2003 with overwhelming evidence. His recorded confession, his DNA at the crime scene, the murder weapon in his possession, and witness testimony from Kristen Willis. Against his attorney's advice, Perry decided to testify in his own defense, a decision that sealed his fate. Perry claimed his confession was false and pointed the finger at Burkett, but the prosecution's cross-examination was devastating. Prosecutor McDougal asked how Perry could have known specific details if he wasn't present. "How did you know Sandra was wearing a blue nightgown when killed?" How did you know Adam had a scar on his left hand? How did you know Jeremy had exactly $23 in his wallet? Perry's answers became increasingly evasive and contradictory. His arrogant, remorseless demeanor convinced jurors of his guilt more than any physical evidence could have. After just 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Perry guilty. The speed shocked court observers. Perry's own testimony had destroyed any chance of acquittal. During the penalty phase, victim impact testimony was devastating. Sandra's mother testified through tears. Adam's girlfriend sobbed about engagement plans that would never happen. Jeremy's father, a Vietnam veteran, broke down completely. The defense argued for mercy based on Perry's youth and troubled background, but prosecutors countered that Perry had been given every advantage and thrown it away. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury sentenced Perry to death by lethal injection. His co-defendant Burkett was tried separately and also convicted, but narrowly escaped execution after emotional testimony about his traumatic childhood, including his father begging the jury to spare his son's life. He received life in prison. Perry was transferred to death row in March 2003 at age 21. Over the next 7 years, he filed numerous appeals, raising every conceivable legal challenge. Courts consistently rejected his claims. Throughout this time, Perry never showed remorse, instead maintaining innocence and giving interviews claiming wrongful conviction. In his final years, Perry attracted supporters who believed his claims about timeline issues and questioned medical examiner credibility. But prosecutors pointed out there was no plausible explanation for Perry driving victims' cars and bragging about murders if he hadn't committed them. By 2010, Perry's case caught the attention of filmmaker Werner Herzog, who chose Perry's story for his documentary, Into the Abyss. Herzog interviewed Perry 8 days before execution. Interestingly, even Herzog, who opposed the death penalty, found Perry's guilt overwhelming. The documentary didn't argue innocence. It examined capital punishment morality. The victims' families rejected any narrative painting Perry as a victim. Sandra's daughter Lisa said, "You don't have to cause the death of individuals to steal a car." Perry's execution was set for July 1, 2010. His final Supreme Court appeals were rejected 90 minutes before the scheduled execution. All legal avenues were exhausted. At 6 p.m., Perry was escorted into the execution chamber. When asked for final words, he delivered a statement revealing his character to the end. "Yes, I want to start off by saying to everyone involved in this atrocity that they are all forgiven by me." Even facing death for murdering 3 people, Perry called his own execution an atrocity and positioned himself as magnanimously forgiving others. He then told his mother he loved her and whispered, "I'm coming home, Dad." No apology to victims' families. No acknowledgement of pain he'd caused. At 6:08 p.m., the lethal injection began. Perry's eyes fluttered closed, his breathing stopped, and a single tear rolled down his cheek. At 6:17 p.m., Michael James Perry was pronounced dead at age 28. After witnessing the execution, Sandra's mother said she felt a weight lifted. "We can get on with our lives now and have peace." Lisa Ballon, who lost both mother and brother, said, "I needed to look into his eyes and see if he was the monster I had made him out to be. Apparently, he is." Even at the end, he showed no remorse. Michael Perry's case remains one of Texas's most senseless crimes. 3 innocent people died because 2 teenagers wanted cars they couldn't afford. The case demonstrates how quickly poor decisions can spiral into unthinkable tragedy. For law enforcement, it showed the importance of physical evidence and confessions. Perry's own words, combined with DNA evidence, created an unshakable case despite his attempts to recant. For society, Perry's case serves as a stark reminder that some individuals may be beyond help regardless of advantages or intervention attempts. Perry had been given multiple chances but rejected them all. Most importantly, it reminds us that every life has value. Sandra's life, Adam's life, and Jeremy's life were infinitely more valuable than any car. They had names, faces, dreams, and people who loved them. Perry spent his final years claiming to be a victim, but his actions tell the real story. Someone who chose violence over conscience, selfishness over empathy, lies over accountability. 3 families were destroyed on October 24, 2001. Sandra Stotler, a nurse who dedicated her life to helping others, was murdered in her own home. Adam Stotler, a 17-year-old with dreams for the future, was shot while trying to help what he thought was an injured friend. Jeremy Richardson, an 18-year-old in the wrong place at the wrong time, paid with his life for his loyalty. The red Camaro was just a car, metal and glass, that could be replaced. But Sandra's life, Adam's life, and Jeremy's life could never be replaced. They were unique, irreplaceable, infinitely valuable. That's the real lesson of Michael James Perry's story. Cars are just things. Lives are precious beyond measure. When someone chooses to destroy lives for things, society has both the right and responsibility to hold them accountable. On July 1, 2010, that accountability was finally rendered. Michael James Perry paid the ultimate price for the ultimate crime, and 3 families could finally begin healing. Justice was served. But the cost? 4 young lives lost, multiple families destroyed, a community traumatized, was far too high. The Camaro killer's reign of terror lasted just 6 days. The consequences lasted a lifetime.